Welcome to Friday, the 29th day of April 2022, your day weather podcast brought to you by Cowboy State Daily, Wyoming's news authority. Check them out at cowboystatedaily.com or their Facebook page. As we head into today and the weekend, rain, snow, thunder, wind. Some of you may experience all of those elements. Some of you, one out of those four, two out of four, but that's kind of what's coming here through the next 3 days, and really into Monday as well. So there's going to be, I'd call it typical spring weather. We have showers coming with widespread areas for rain, snow, and thunder for South Dakota, Montana, parts of North Dakota, Wyoming, Nebraska, through early Saturday as this next storm comes together. We did see last night and yesterday afternoon some nice rain. Parts of northern Wyoming, Buffalo, just under a half inch of rain, more than a quarter of inch of rain for Gillette and Sheridan, Graybull. Some really good moisture falling early this morning in parts of the Bighorn Basin. Up around the Golden Triangle of Montana around Great Falls, rain and snow there has gone over 6/10 of an inch of rain. So the system that came in yesterday and last night was a good rain producer and snow producer for some areas, and more is coming. Now here's the bad news. None of you want to hear this, but it's going to get really windy later today and Saturday for lots of southeastern Wyoming, Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, the same areas that have been battered by the wind. There's going to be another about 36 hours of high winds from this afternoon through Saturday in those areas. But as the storm moves out, we should see those winds lay down Sunday. Now there's a decent chance for areas of rain and thunder and some snow Sunday night into Monday for parts of southern Wyoming, eastern Colorado, western Kansas, and Nebraska. Then another system is coming in late Tuesday, and it may hang around through Thursday of next week. That could track further south. That's exactly what some of the parched areas of Colorado, western Kansas, and Nebraska really need. We'll show you that. And then also we're going to do some comparisons of what's been happening this spring with previous seasons to kind of give you an idea of really how much of impact La Niña has on the weather patterns in the western high plains when La Niña has happened during the spring season. Satellite photo shows very impressive areas of thunderstorms that developed overnight and early this morning in these areas here. Nice patch of precipitation up here in the form of rain, snow, and thunder. These thunderstorms last night produced some very heavy rain in some parts and will continue to move like this throughout the course of the day. We had flash flooding near Columbus, Nebraska, due to extremely heavy rain that fell with a thunderstorm last night. So that moisture tap coming in from the south, that higher humidity air, this was some fog that formed this morning as that humidity has gone up ahead of that low pressure system, typical for spring. Now by tomorrow morning and by later on this afternoon, this low begins to move into Nebraska. This map is for later today towards evening. The low starts to spin up over western Nebraska with the next low behind it. And by Saturday morning, we have a more intense low. Notice you see more closed circles there. The storm intensifies. This brings the high winds on the backside of it, but it then draws up a lot of moisture and brings rain and thunderstorms to this area here, while it's very windy on the backside of these storms. Again, the southern plains, the central plains battered by the wind. The northern plains get wet again. The next system coming in behind it, this is the guy that comes in Sunday night and Monday. This is the rainfall forecast through Sunday morning. So the area highlighted here, this is going to be just wonderful rain. Now, there is going to be a chance, like what happened in south central Nebraska last night, there's going to be areas that get more than they need or too quickly, but that comes with the territory this time of year. So some really good and beneficial rains coming to these areas here. Montana as well. Notice this little wedge here in western North Dakota. They actually catch a break. They could use more rain. They're going to get more, but they're also tired of these weekend storms. Nice moisture falling here in northern Wyoming. Nice moisture, Washington into Oregon and Idaho with the next system as well. And then, as we have seen all spring, you get along into southeastern Wyoming and along and south of Interstate 70. It's just a dry hole continuing here, at least with this next system. This is what the snowfall forecast looks like. Snow levels are pretty high, but the mountains are going to get some snow out of this. Here's the wind. These are the forecasted wind gusts through Sunday morning. Most of these winds happen from this afternoon through Saturday evening. Strongest winds right here across western areas of Nebraska, southeastern Wyoming, parts of the Front Range of Colorado, and then you can see the strong winds in southern Colorado, strong winds in New Mexico, the panhandles into Oklahoma and Texas. I am cautiously optimistic that after this storm moves out, the wind event scenario for next week looks lower. Fingers crossed on that one. We'll have to wait and see. Now, as we get into Sunday afternoon, we've got this little low over Utah. It doesn't look like much, but these systems in spring can be really effective ways to make showers and thunderstorms form as the atmosphere gets more moist. The atmosphere gets warmer in the southern latitudes, but you still have the colder air available here. So you kind of have the right recipe to make it easier for showers and thunderstorms to develop. We're expecting this system to slide due eastward just like this during the overnight hours of Sunday into Monday morning. This is by Monday morning. Notice it's not moving real quick. So that's good news. What it will do is it will produce areas of showers and thunderstorms in this stretch right here during the overnight hours of Sunday into Monday. So this does not include the current storm. This is the next batch of precipitation. Look at Nebraska, northwest Kansas. Look at the South Platte Valley of northeastern Colorado. We're hoping that some of this gets further back westward into the Front Range of Colorado. I think there's a really good chance of that. So this system tracking further south, getting at least now down to I-70 with better chances for precipitation. But it doesn't end there. Also notice these showers and thunderstorms over Texas and Oklahoma. This is for next Wednesday. So let me back up. So this is the system that comes in Sunday night, Monday. This low right here is forecasted to come in and move back in right behind this one. Now, if it does, notice it's in Utah by Wednesday morning. And notice it's larger. It's a bigger storm system. Also notice there's a disconnect in orange colors here. If this happens, and for those of you praying for rain in these areas here, you want this to happen. You want it to break off from the main jet stream. We call this a cut-off low. What ends up happening is these lows get cut off from the main river of air, the main jet stream winds, and what causes this to happen is we call these May meanderers. You get a meandering low, and this is typical in May and early June, to where they get cut off from the main jet stream and slowly wobble through an area. This is really important because during the winter and spring season that's been dominated by La Niña, you get these really fast jet stream winds that just take these storms and race them through. This slows them down. Now, it is possible that it does not get detached and it stays along the jet stream. And of course, what that would mean a more northerly track. So there are two scenarios unfolding for next week. One is this southerly route, which would be great news for these areas here, maybe down here as well. If it takes more of a more northerly track, well, it's more rain and more snow for these areas up here, and yep, more wind for these areas down here. So we really, really, really need this to go further south to help out the areas that are in the most dire need of precipitation. And that would be southeastern Wyoming, western Nebraska, all of eastern Colorado, these areas here especially. So we'll see what happens. Keep your fingers crossed. Now, taking a look at the latest drought monitor, you can really see why we're rooting for this area here to get precipitation. Look at all the red. We just mentioned some really good precipitation falling here overnight and early this morning. But what we did see, the biggest improvement in drought status, now it's hard to tell on this map, is right here. The heavier precipitation with these blizzards up here in North Dakota, northeastern Wyoming, western South Dakota has caused the drought monitor to show improvements. Anywhere you see green right here, there have been improvement in drought status conditions. And I think we'll see more improvements with next week's drought monitor there. But you can see drought conditions getting worse in eastern Colorado, parts of Kansas, and Nebraska. We're going to see this go away, and we're going to see more improvements, especially in South Dakota and North Dakota going forward. Back into Idaho and southwestern areas of Montana, we saw improvements as well. Very minor improvement there in the Sierra Nevada of California. Now, I wanted to kind of go back and show you some comparisons to what's happening now and what happened a year ago. This is a weather map showing the percent of normal precipitation that happened from February 1st of last year to the end of April last year, to just kind of contrast the two different stories that are kind of unfolding here over the last 3 months. So a year ago, the heaviest precipitation relative to normal was in this area right here in the western high plains. While the contrast, it was much drier in Montana, northern Wyoming, northern South Dakota. Those areas were drier and these areas were wetter. Of course, this big area, this big patch of wetness, really mostly due to that big storm that happened in March of 2021, but also April of 2021 in those areas was pretty wet. Now contrast that to what's happened this same period from February 1st roughly, this is roughly the same time frame, to the end of April. It's completely opposite. The areas that were wetter a year ago are now drier, and the areas a year ago that were drier have gotten more wet. So basically, these areas have flipped. There's been just a complete reversal of fortune in a year if you compare February to the end of April. Pretty interesting scenario when you look at it. Mother Nature evens things out in the end, just not right away. Now, talking about La Niña, there's been some press reports that we could have a full-fledged 3-year La Niña. I want to throw a little cold water on that, no puns intended. We are definitely going to probably have La Niña stick with us through summer, maybe into early fall. There is an outside chance it could go into December. That's why they're talking about the third winter of La Niña. But what we want to do is we want to look back at similar La Niña patterns to compare and contrast. This La Niña, as we've mentioned in other podcasts, is most similar to what happened when the La Niña formed in the middle part of 2010 and continued all the way into February and March of 2012. We all remember how devastating that stretch of conditions were in 2011 and 2012 with the very severe drought conditions. The other La Niña that we had was impressive, was 2007 into 2009 right here. Then when we go and we take a look at the more intense La Niñas, 2000, 2010, and 11, and then here we are right here with another situation of a long-lasting La Niña. La Niñas that tend to go multi-years tend to happen close to the solar minimums, which is about every 10 to 11 years or so. We have had 22 consecutive periods of a La Niña status, which is about the same that we had up here. To make it a 3-year La Niña, we got to go 36 periods for that to happen. I don't see that happening. We're going to have a 2.5-year La Niña, as we are going to see it cycle out, but it's not going to be until probably December or as we get on into the beginnings of the winter season 2023. Now, I want to show you a proxy. A proxy is where we kind of compare one location to represent some other areas. In this situation, I'm picking Cheyenne because Cheyenne has been extremely dry here in April. I went back and I looked at the records and I noticed a very interesting pattern, and we could probably say similar things for the Front Range of southeastern Wyoming and the Front Range of Colorado. I want you to notice this. So for April 2022, Cheyenne's going to have one of its driest Aprils in a long, long time. That's ridiculous amount of dryness when the average is 1 3/4 of an inch. But I went back and I tried to find the other periods of April historically that were very dry. So here we are in 2022. The next driest month in April was 2012. La Niña. La Niña, April of 2002, April of 92.34 inches. Notice a trend here? Every 10 years, we tend to have these stronger La Niña cycles, roughly. They could be 11, they could be 12, they could be 9, but somewhere in that time frame. So this is definitely a sign where La Niña is impacting the central and southern plains with dryness, while there is help for those northern areas. Speaking of La Niña, one other thing I want to point out is that this shows the intensity and the depth of the colder waters in the subtropical Pacific. Notice that we've gone back to blue here after a little spike where it did get a little bit warmer briefly for January into early February. Notice there's been a little bit of an upward trend in the sea surface temperatures here and the depth of it. Nowhere near what we had in October of 2021. So yes, La Niña is continuing, but the depth of the cold water is not as thick, and that's a good sign for this La Niña to die eventually, but it's going to die a very, very slow death. One thing I wanted to show you is the Japanese model forecasting out over the next couple of weeks. You see this patch of blue right here that's showing up? This is the Japanese model showing the trend of maybe a more southerly branch of the jet stream forming during the month of May. This is something that we're seeing with that possible storm by the middle of next week, kind of getting cut off from the main jet stream and becoming that meandering May low. If this pattern does come to fruition, slow-moving lows tracking further south may happen in the month of May, especially the first 2 or 3 weeks of May. Keep your fingers crossed. This is an encouraging data point from the model here. If it does indeed come to fruition, we may have better May precipitation a little bit further south. Keep your fingers crossed. Have yourself a great weekend. We'll see you Monday.